That's the union that'll tear the fascists down.
When people tell you who they are, believe them. And, you know, it's all in Donald Trump's track record. Donald Trump likes to talk about the auto worker. He's going to bring the jobs back. He was president. He didn't do anything to bring jobs back. Factory under his watch, and he did nothing. You know, and it's the same thing. You know, he talks about he stands with workers, with our members. He sits there, and then he sits there with Elon Musk and calls Elon the greatest cutter and celebrates him, and they're laughing about the fact that he fires striking workers.
And I look at what you do. You walk in and you just say, you want to quit? They go on strike. I won't mention the name of the company, but they go on strike, and you say, that's okay, you're all gone. You're all gone. So every one of you is gone, and you are the greatest. You would be very good. Oh, you would love it.
You know, I tell our members this all the time. If Donald Trump was president, there would have been no stand-up strike. They would have fired us all. You know, that's who he is. He doesn't give a damn about working class people, never has and never will. He represents the corporate class and the billionaire class, and that's all he represents. So we call him a scab because, you know, scabs are people that break strikes, that cross picket lines. Donald Trump has walked across picket lines before in his own building, in his own business. And he talks about firing striking workers. So Donald Trump is a scab. It's exactly what he is.
This is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek, and we're facing an election in 3 weeks that could lead to Trump taking power in an election if he doesn't have a coup or insurrection, which he did on January the 6th. And we're also facing a situation, and just recently on Bob Woodward's book, the chief of staff, the military, Milley, said that he felt that Trump was a fascist and it was a danger to the future of the United States as is presently constituted. And we wanted to talk about fascism if Trump gets elected and what that would mean to working people in this country who want to struggle for their union, want to struggle for worker and democratic rights. And joining us are John Palmer, International Vice President of the Teamsters, General Vice President, and Frank Hammer is retired president of UAW 909 in Detroit, and also Carol Lang, who's a professor at CUNY in New York and a member of the United Front Committee for the Labor Party. So welcome to the show, all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, John, why don't you start it off? You have been very concerned about the failure of the Teamsters to take a position on the election and the danger of Trump coming to power and what it would mean for Teamsters and workers in this country.
Well, you know, it just seems like it keeps going off the rails even after the non-endorsement. The idea that somehow, you know, our job as leaders in the labor movement is to reflect polls, which I think, honestly, I doubt. I think they're rather bogus. I don't see 60% of the membership supporting Trump. We do have a problem, and that's on us for not educating our members. But your point about what the cost of this could be could come to fruition really quickly. You know, this is a guy that talked about replacing striking workers as an honorable thing with Elon Musk, thought it was funny and even chuckled at it. Elon Musk himself has tried to undo the labor board. You know, we were talking about federal judges, the appointment of federal judges. The Supreme Court's already given him, in essence, carte blanche against all, you know, to do whatever he needs to do with government employees, and that would be just about everything that affects labor. I mean, we're talking about safety, we're talking about environment, we're talking about labor and organizing. So it could be catastrophic in very short order, depending on how fast they want to move. You know, they made it really clear in Project 2025 what their intentions were, and you know, anybody that believes Donald Trump isn't endorsing or listening to the folks that put that together for him has got their head in the sand, because clearly those Supreme Court justices were sort of presented to Trump and the Republicans through that same group of right wingers. So it's really important that we vote. It's unfortunate that we have two choices, but one is very deadly, and you know, the other's more of the same. But you know, right at this point, I'd rather vote for more of the same than somebody who's going to kill us off.
And there are thousands of Amazon workers now who are joining the Teamsters Union. In San Francisco, they joined 100, and all over they want a union. And what would it mean if the NLRB was to be shut down or taken over by basically corporations that the unions are fighting.
Well, again, what happened when Trump was in office was he appointed union busters from the Jones Day law firm to run the National Labor Relations Board, which is supposed to be this Lady Liberty, Lady Justice, right? That the scales of justice is supposed to look at both sides fairly. We as labor people know that's probably never been the case, but at least in the last 3.5 going on 4 years, we've had a reversal of that. We've had some decisions that support us in organizing. Even given that, basically, if you organize a group of workers right now, you kind of have a year before the company tries to decertify you. They do it through their agents inside the bargaining unit, and they'll decertify the group, and eventually you lose the group you had. You never get a contract. A lot of these things are addressed in the PRO Act. It's not perfect, but a lot of these things are addressed. Trump has no interest in moving the PRO Act, which would force the biggest threat as the NLRA is constituted right now to organizing is getting your first contract. It's almost impossible with a major corporation because they are simply going to stall and delay, and you file charges and it goes on, and eventually you lose the unit. And you wind up with nothing but a lot of money spent. And in many cases, you have workers that really, really saw the union as a viable change agent for their lives and their families, that all of a sudden they no longer see that because they feel like we did nothing for them. And this is the effect of an ineffectual labor board, or heaven forbid there'd be no labor board at all. So under the Trump administration, we saw that sort of policy. During the Biden-Harris years, we saw some changes, not what we'd all like to see, but they were changing. At least we were playing in a fairer playing field than what we've seen with Trump. And I think this is his second term. He owns the Supreme Court. There are no guardrails. So people should really, I'm not a fearmonger. He's the fearmonger, but as a member of labor, I'm deeply concerned about where we're headed.
Okay, thank you, John. And Frank, what are your thoughts? The UAW is now under monitorship for past corruption, and we know from the experience with Ron Kerry that the monitorship it was used to put Ron Kerry and threaten him with jail time in a trial to remove him from office. Are you concerned about what would happen in the UAW as far as the organizing campaign and Trump winning, or a fascist regime in the United States, and what it would mean for auto workers who want to organize throughout the country?
Those are all very critical questions, and I'm glad that we're giving them some air. The more air that we give this discussion, the better. I did prepare. Let me back up. So I just came from a Zoom event with the caucus of which I'm a member, and I want to give you a little update. It's Unite All Workers for Democracy, and you're right. It used to be Unite All UAW and New Directions, and the reason I think that's important because I think that they represent now a national, UAWD now represents a national caucus in the union that's, that's pushing its elbows out. So it's a pretty powerful testament to the spirit of wanting to fight and wanting to fight to make things better for not only themselves, but for the entire working class. And I'm proud to be representing them. And John, when you get a chance later on, by all means, I hope to show this to UAWD members. I hope they see it, and I want to make sure they're properly introduced to you and who you are. So here's what I prepared for the UAWD, and there's certainly room for a lot more discussion. If Trump returns to the White House, by election or otherwise, he's made it very clear he's coming after the UAW and President Fain. And Steve, this goes to an answer to your question. He will use federal monitor Neil Barofsky to place the UAW in receivership and possibly President Fain in detention. At the RNC, Trump declared the leader of the United Auto Workers should be fired immediately. He was referring to Fain's advocacy of electric vehicles, which threatens Trump's oil company founders. But there's also Fain's support for Palestine, which Borowski, on behalf of the Zionist lobby, has already declared a no-no. Is the UAWD prepared, and for that matter, the UAW? Will we suffer a serious setback in our fight for a more democratic and militant union? The assault on the UAW is part of a broader planned attack, and this goes to some of what you were saying, John, under a Trump administration that is aimed at reversing the gains won by organized labor, starting with the National Labor Relations Act of 1935. That's all spelled out in the Reactionary Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. 37 pages of which target the labor movement, starting on page 581. And if implemented, it will eviscerate the UAW's ability to organize, especially in the South. We can expect accelerated repression against the UAW organizers. Project 2025, and I have a list of items here that I gleaned out of articles that were written about it. Project 2025 aims at reclassifying thousands of federal government employees so they can be fired and replaced with Trump loyalists. That's this remasking or redoing of the administrative state. 2, abolishing overtime pay laws. 3, getting rid of health and safety protections. 4, eliminating the federal minimum wage by letting states set their own. 5, making it harder to receive unemployment. 6, putting children back to work like in the 1920s. 7, getting rid of requirements for prevailing wage pay in federal projects. 8, making the NLRB corporate friendly, to your point, John. 9, banning public employee unions and thereby cutting organized labor by half. And 10, allowing businesses to create their own sham company unions, something that was forbidden in the NLRA Act of 1935. So I said, that's not all of it, but on these last 2 points about banning public employee unions and creating company unions, we should be very clear of the parallels to Nazi Germany. And that's why I'm wearing the shirt. One of the first acts by Adolf Hitler in 1933 was to outlaw unions. In their place, Hitler set up employer-dominated German labor front with mandatory worker membership. We don't want to go there. For this and many other reasons, our number one objective should be defeating Donald Trump.
Frank, it seems like that most workers in this country, most unionists, are not discussing the issue of fascism. I mean, MSNBC has been having program after program. They had a program this morning about Musk and what Musk and the fascists around him, techno-fascists, want. And they have a plan to deregulate, to stop all the lawsuits against him for illegal activity. He fired 700 auto workers at the Fremont Tesla plant who wanted to organize a union. But yet within the labor movement among working people, there doesn't seem to be that concern that this is even an issue.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for example, how it is that the electorate is split, according to all these polls. I don't know if they're accurate. But I think in part is that this is a project, Project 2025, Trump, all of it is run by billionaires. And it's rare when billionaires expose each other. That's kind of like a no-no. So in the absence of that kind of exposure, and even, you mentioned MSNBC, but any of the corporate media, what happens is that there's a gloss that gets put over it. and so many different things that have gone down become normalized. They become part of the fabric of our lives. And that in turn affects our consciousness and our, slows down our, mental faculties in terms of putting things together, connecting the dots, like they say, and getting our own picture of the reality that we're living in. And as a result, when we're talking to other workers and people just in general, you're talking to them, but they're looking at all the dots out of a different frame, and they don't see you the way you connect the dots. And what you got to do is you got to show them the frame you're looking through. And once they look through the frame we're talking about, they're going to start connecting the dots. And the question is, do we have enough time? So this is very, very timely. Thank you.
3 weeks to the election. Carol, your thoughts? I mean, I think the same issue in New York, where you're a teacher in the union. The unions aren't discussing the issue of fascism. And people who try to bring it up in the unions are opposition to even having a discussion about it.
Well, they don't want to talk about it. They want to pretend, as they've pretended all along, that if we just vote for the Democrat, then some person on the white horse, in this case, it will be Kamala Harris, will come and save us. And so rather than rocking the boat, rather than organizing the working class to rise up against this danger, their way, in fact, in my union, we haven't had a contract in almost 2 years, and we're not allowed to strike. But rather than challenging the law, which is clearly anti-worker, what they want to do is get us all arrested. So they're trying to get us to practice civil disobedience, thinking moronically, in my opinion, because it can't be naively, that CUNY, our boss, will feel so guilty that they will then give us a raise. I mean, the whole thing is so ludicrous that, whenever I get up at a union meeting and I say, well, we have to discuss strategy, let's talk about talking about striking even, I'm completely ignored, and the next person comes up and they move on. But I just actually came from this Communist Party Great Britain talk on what's happening with Netanyahu and Gaza and American imperialism, and nobody talked about fascism. And when I raised the question of fascism, I mean, this is the piece that makes leftists have a hard time with this question, because many leftists, especially of the Maoist, Stalinist type, think everything is fascism. So if somebody is a racist, it makes them fascist. Classical definition. In fact, I had an argument with somebody in PL just a couple of days ago about how we're approaching, and he said we're already in fascism. And if we were already in fascism, there wouldn't be any demonstrations on the street. It's just.
Well, that's something that Trump has said, that he plans to arrest people, these Palestinian American protesters and Muslims. I mean, deport 13 million people. And if he has state power and he has a Supreme Court that says if you declare it an official act, you can get away with it, it seems like that it's something that he can actually do. I mean, that is under the law, under the Supreme Court and the structure, with a compliant Congress, and the Republicans may win the Senate and the Congress, that he would have the right to do whatever he wants in relationship to those kind of things.
But right at this very moment, we don't have fascism. I mean, I think that we're moving, and I think the bourgeoisie will choose that because they won't have any alternative. But it's not the Harris or Trump or anybody, it's the bourgeoisie that makes that decision. But the point that I'm trying to make is, on the other side, the response of the people from the CPGB who did respond to me said that because there's no working class uprising, because, and I mentioned this, the bureaucracy has managed to clamp down on any sort of revolt, then we don't have fascism. We don't have to worry about fascism. And so either side is not looking at the dynamics that are happening in this country, which is basically, racism is becoming intensified, anti-immigrant feelings are becoming intensified, working class people's ability to survive is diminishing. we're headed to an unusual crisis, one of the 1929 magnitude. And if that's the case, if the working class will rise up, which I expect that they will, then fascism will be the only alternative and they will crush the working class. And the other thing is that I mentioned Project 2025, and one guy just sloughed it off like that will never happen. And it's just like people are living in some fantasy land that they refuse to grip reality and see the magnificent crisis that's befalling us, and that will ultimately end up, crushing the working class movement as Trump, intends to do.
And well, what should labor do if Trump is elected? John, what should be the response? I mean, it seems like he's got a plan, Project 2025. They're very open about it. He's threatening people. He just threatened to take away the license of the CBS because he didn't like the programming of sending, the program. He's talking about dictatorial intervention in any kind of democratic rights.
One thing that labor shouldn't be doing is separating itself over issues at this point. I think it's what lies ahead of us is deadly serious. And I do think, to Carol's point earlier, if we think back a couple of years about the teacher strikes in places like Oklahoma, West Virginia, they didn't have the right to strike. Those people did not have the right to strike, but they did it because in many ways, how are you going to replace them? Not everybody sort of rests in that position, but we've been talking about, national strikes for years. We've been talking about people getting out of the streets, but I don't see any other way around it. If you're going to be passive and sit on your ass, okay, then you're going to get a shitty meal, and you need to we're going to have to demand better than that, and we're going to have leadership. People, Sean O'Brien calls himself a militant. He's not a militant. He's a corporate unionist. That's the problem with all of our large unions. They've become corporatized, and they have HR departments, and they run exactly like every other operation in corporate America. We are the union, and the organizing model has to prevail. We have to stop running a business model. It's got to be an organizing model. And just like all of these issues we're discussing right now, we failed to tell our members why it's unhealthy to vote for these people. Now, people might do what they might do because they worry about their guns more than they do about their paycheck. It's our job to sort of make them understand that you can't own a gun or buy ammo for it if you don't have a job. So I think that's it. I think I mentioned the status quo earlier. I think we're stuck on the idea that you work within the confines of the system. And I'm not certain that that's going to be productive going forward, particularly with this guy. He's going to turn everything on its head. And if they're going to do that, you can't play by the rules either. You have to, but we have the power as people. I think we failed to realize that for generations now. All of it, I'm in my 60s. I was born into relatively dynamic economy. We and took for granted the rights that we had. And I've watched those evaporate, particularly for women. I mean, I've watched and minorities, and the attack on transgendered people, all these things. In the meantime, like you talked about, Steve, our coasts are being ravaged by storms that are incredibly powerful. We're clearly there are alternatives to fossil fuels and job creating alternatives. Yet the political system is so corrupt with money, and and on both sides of the aisle, you can't get elected without the money. So something's got to upset that, and thinking that you're going to do it the way that it's been done clearly hasn't worked in 40 or 50 years now. Certainly, probably 50 years that we've been on this course.
And Frank, Sean Fain has proposed a organizing for contracts, all the contracts in the United States to expire, I think, in 2028, and have a national general strike. That idea of a general strike is some action that the working class can take as a class to fight against a coup, to fight against an insurrection. But it might have to be sooner than 2028 at the rate we're going, because if Trump does take power and workers do go on strike, he may call out the army against workers, try to shut down, call out the army against protesters. I mean, there's a real threat of a military fascist dictatorship. Frank?
Yeah, I just watched an advanced copy of a video that's going to come out midweek. It'll be online through the analysis.news. The editor is Paul J. And the reason I'm bringing it up in the context of what you just said, and I'm hoping to that it'll be get distributed, is that he goes into the whole what he does is he educates us in this video that the first term for Donald Trump was a dress rehearsal. And we have to understand that if he and his billionaires go back in and control the government, that they're going to follow through with their dress rehearsal. And it behooves us to know what is part of that dress rehearsal. And I don't think we all know or are speaking enough about it. And I certainly felt that way when I was watching the documentary that was put together. But he's got a quote from Flynn, General Flynn, that martial law, declaring martial law in the US is no big deal. And he is quoted as saying, it's happened 64 times in US history. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but the mental framework is that if we want to institute martial law, we're going to do it. And like you're saying about the Supreme Court, there's not going to be anything that's going to be saying that's not within your bailiwick. They can do it. So in view of that, it means that our unions have to sort of buttress their ideology, their thinking. And Steve, you were mentioning earlier about the remarkable move that Sean Fain made. I mean, in several respects for the UAW. One, that he used the term general strike, and he has popularized this term in ways we didn't know before. He's connected it with the contract expiration at the Detroit the three auto companies, right? Ford, Chrysler, Stellantis, so that their contracts are going to expire on April 30th, 2028. That's why it's as far out as 2028. And by doing all of that, Fain also linked it to May Day. And if there's anything that's been a taboo in our country, it's been the celebration of our Workers' Day that was originated in the USA. And that's a very powerful package that he has delivered to us. And it is something that we need to run on to say, working class, we're a working class, and we have international interests, and we're going to educate ourselves about our radical tradition, because that's what we're going to need in response to the threat of, for example, martial law. All of a sudden, I mean, if they impose martial law, which they contemplated in 2016, then there's no reason why they may not do it now, and they may be in a much stronger position to do it. And with the guys like Thiel and Elon Musk and so on, they want to recreate the vision of government as being a corporation, and they're on the board of directors. And it ain't nothing about rank and file democracy, as there is no democracy in corporations. So that's what we're looking at. And I think if we have a sober conversation like we're doing here and talking about how do we deal with this going forward, all to the good. Thank you.
Okay. Carol, what are your thoughts? I mean, I think that one of the things that I think will happen if Trump does come to power, though, is to go after the UAW, which is already a monitorship, use the monitorship to say that it should be taken over and trusteeship by the government, and then file criminal charges against Sean Fain for corruption, which is involved in some of the charges against him, whether they're true or not. The same thing I think happened in the Teamsters against Ron Carey. Charges were brought against him, which were false. But he was removed from president of the Teamsters Union with using those measures. Carol?
The description that Frank just gave is exactly the description of classical fascism. That's what Mussolini organized. That's what Hitler organized. That the state was the incorporator of the entire economy. The designee of the working class at the time was involved in the board of directors. That we had overcome the idea of class struggle. There was no longer classes under Mussolini. There was just Italian. Under Hitler, there was these Aryans, that we were all just one. And there may be some grievances, but in fact, we have a board. We have a union person on the board that's going to be discussing how to handle all of these issues that people have. But the classical idea of fascism fits perfectly into what Frank described as what the economy is, and the state essentially is going to look at. Everything is in the state, nothing is outside of the state, no class struggle, no unions, no strikes, none of those things. We're all in the state. And where we don't have the working class yet is part of the classical definition of fascism. The working class is not dead in the United States and is going to fight. And these people are getting ready for either using Sean O'Brien, and I think he's going to be the designee if there is going to be that example. And they're going to use they already used the police in New York and across the country to stop the encampments. I got my rib broken. We have a thing in New York called the Rapid Police Force, and those are the people that go out and they take their batons and their guns and beat people up. And so this police state is not at all foreign to the United States. It's happened in the past in many demonstrations, the Pinkertons, people who shot people who went out on strike in 1934 in Toledo and all of that. But that's all there. That all exists within the state and exists within the structure of American capitalism. And I'm quite frightened, I have to tell you, about this eventuality.
Okay, well, I think we've talked about some of the serious issues facing working people if Trump comes to power, and what working people should do. So I want to thank all of you for joining us. And I think that issue of fascism and the threat to the working class and how workers should be organized to defend themselves is a life and death issue for working people in this country. So I think it's a critical life and death issue. And we're facing a cataclysmic situation, much like the people of Florida faced in a climate issue. They're facing a life and death situation because there may be another hurricane on the way as well. It's not going to stop with this last hurricane.
Can I add a note to that?
How can you get more crazy than what's happening in Florida?
Right. Just another note. I mean, we just have to be very clear that Trump continues and advances, and the whole machinery blows off the notion that we're involved in a climate crisis in the middle of a flood. So just to be clear, what consequences this has to have somebody that's in power that blows it off as a hoax.
That is a real danger.
And people are being threatened. Climatologists are being threatened for talking about global warming.
That's right.
By his fascist band.
Yeah, that is fascist. Okay, well, thanks for joining us.
Right.
Solidarity, and we got to keep up the fight. Thank you, brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Solidarity.
Bye.